We often think of history as this nice, neat, straight line, right? One event happens, then the next, then the next. But what if it's not a line at all? What if it's more like a giant invisible web connecting people and places across oceans and thousands of years? Well, today, we're going to pull on some of those threads, and I promise you, we're going to uncover some connections that seem, well, almost impossible. So let's just jump right in with a real head scratcher. Picture a globe for a second. You've got Japan way over here and Ecuador way over there. Thousands and thousands of miles of open ocean between them. You'd think their ancient histories would be totally separate stories. But what if I told you there's a clue, literally baked in clay, that tells a very, very different story? Okay, have a look at this. On the left, that's Jomon pottery from Japan, some of it dating back to 7000 BC. The name Jomon even means rope patterns for those cool markings you see. Now, look at the right. That is Valdivian pottery from the coast of Ecuador from around 2000 BC. The similarity is just wild. It was so striking, in fact, that a couple of Smithsonian archaeologists came up with a theory that is absolutely mind-bending. And that pottery? That's just our first thread. It's one of many, many ancient echoes we're about to tune into. Little clues that suggest our distant ancestors were way more connected than we ever give them credit for. So here's the theory. A Japanese immigration to Ecuador, thousands of years ago. I mean, just let that sink in. This isn't just about two people having the same idea for a pot. This implies a journey across the entire Pacific Ocean. It completely flips our whole idea of the ancient world as a bunch of isolated bubbles. It makes you wonder, who else was out there, crossing these huge oceans? And it turns out, this might not just be a one-off thing. Our source is filled with these little breadcrumbs. For example, we find illustrations of the exact same kind of reed boat technology all the way from Mesopotamia to the Atlantic coast of Africa. And then there's this, an alleged Phoenician inscription from 536 BC, supposedly found in Brazil. And look at these giant stone tombs, these dolmens. They're all over Europe, sure, but they also pop up in India. Are these all just massive coincidences? Or are they faint signals from a forgotten age of global travel? But these connections, they weren't just about people moving around. It was about what they carried with them, their most powerful ideas, their game-changing inventions. So let's take a look at how a single great idea could travel the world and change everything. Let's talk about the horse-drawn chariot. This thing was the ancient world's battle tank. It was an absolute revolution in speed and power. But here's the thing. An invention this good didn't just pop up in different places all at once. Nope, it spread. It was a technology so dominant that once it showed up on your doorstep, you either had to copy it or you were going to get conquered. Its story is the perfect example of how ideas move. And you can see just how fast this technology took over. Around 1680 BC, a group called the Hyksos ride into Egypt on chariots and boom, the Middle Kingdom is over. A couple hundred years later, the Hittites have perfected it and used chariots to build a massive empire. But technology never stands still, does it? By 1000 BC, some clever Iranian tribes realize, hey, why do we need the whole cart? Let's just ride the horse. And just like that, cavalry is born, and the chariot becomes obsolete. It's a whole cycle: innovation, domination, and then disruption by the next big thing. The story of iron is another perfect example. At first, it's basically a state secret held by the Hittites. It's so rare and valuable, it was worth 40 times its weight in silver. Can you imagine? But secrets like that, they don't last. The knowledge gets out, it spreads. By the 800s BC, little villages in Italy are figuring out how to make their own iron. And then, just 200 years later, the Assyrians turn that once precious metal into the backbone of their war machine, arming their entire army with iron swords and building iron-tipped battering rams. The idea spread, and it completely reshaped the world. Of course, these connections weren't always a friendly exchange of pottery techniques or blacksmithing secrets. Very often the web was woven by the mass movement of people, migrations, invasions, collisions that could redraw the map and sometimes cause entire civilizations to just collapse. This is a pretty chilling quote describing the fall of one of the world's first great urban civilizations, the Indus Valley people. For centuries, they had these incredibly advanced, organized cities, and then, poof, they were gone. What in the world happened? Well, the answer is complicated, and it really shows how tangled this web can be. One theory points the finger at invaders from the north. Another suggests a huge environmental disaster, like the river they depended on just drying up. But a newer theory suggests they might have done it to themselves through things like deforestation. It just goes to show how people, their neighbors, and the planet are all connected. And this pattern of collapse and transformation, it's not a one-time thing. It happens over and over. Around 1200 BC, you have the Dorians sweeping into Greece and bringing the mighty Mycenaean civilization to an end. Then, fast forward more than 1500 years, and you see the Visigoths marching into Spain and toppling the Roman order there. It seems like people on the move have always been one of the biggest engines of change in history. And this wasn't just happening in Europe and Asia. A very similar story was playing out right here in North America. First, you have the Adena culture, these early mound builders. They flourish and then they just kind of fade away. They're replaced by the Hopewell people, who create these amazing trade networks spanning half the continent. But eventually, their networks crumble too. It's the same pattern. Interconnected societies rise, they influence each other, and then they give way to the next wave. So from ancient pottery to revolutionary chariots, from the secret of iron to the fall of entire civilizations, every single example we've looked at points to the same simple conclusion. History isn't a straight line of isolated events. It's a deeply, deeply interconnected web. And honestly, there is no better picture of this historical web than the DNA of modern England. The country didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was built layer by layer, through centuries of connection, migration, and flat-out invasion. You start with the original native people. Then come the Celts. Then the Romans add their thread. Then the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes. And finally, the Vikings, the Danes, and Normans. Every single group wove their own thread into the tapestry that became England. So, the big takeaway here is that the real engine of history is connection itself. It's the movement of people, of goods, of ideas, whether it's peaceful trade or violent conquest, that truly shapes our world. Nothing happens in a vacuum. It's all connected. So the next time you think about the past, maybe try to forget that straight line. Instead, picture this huge, tangled, and absolutely fascinating web, where a new idea in one corner of the world can end up unraveling an empire on the other side. Which leaves us with one last, pretty important question to chew on. We've just tried to untangle the hidden web of the past. But what about right now? What are the unseen threads being woven today that are quietly shaping the history that our grandkids will be trying to figure out?